one of the sections in the chapter and that I thought was particularly, I had fun writing it, and I think for students it's actually quite a good exercise, was I tried to recreate what empire looked like from a deck of a ship. So one of the things I did was I used, there is no perfect way, and I'm sure you will point this out to me. I used an East India Company journal. So I tried to think of what could I use. So I selected one journal as a representative of a vast body of literature. This journal is of a cadet in the East India Company. So it's sort of late 1820s, or no, 1824, so earlier 1820s. But it's at this point you already have fairly established travel. You don't have the Suez Canal, but you do have established ports of call, which would go around the Cape. And I tried to think about, so what did this British maritime empire look like while on board a ship? Right, so then I tried to think about, so when you arrive at a port, what do you see? And I noticed in this one, even this one cadet's journal, there is a real emphasis on naval power, emblems of empire. So seeing a flag, seeing certain structures and buildings, the infrastructure of warehouses, for instance. So this is what I explored via this journal. And I felt that that was one way of taking that those broader, sort of more abstract ideas of maritime empire and distilling it into something that was a bit more tangible in terms of, if you were on a ship traveling around British ports, what would you expect to find? Right, so this was one way that I tried to sort of bridge that Victorian notions of what they were doing, what they were building with this maritime empire, and the realities from someone traveling within it. And I think you could replicate that other ways. There is a book by Kenny Ting, who is at the ACM. Kenny Ting works on port cities, and he's written it's sort of a coffee table book called The Grand Tour. It's really very much a coffee table book, but it's a book which looks at the fashion for touring the port cities of Asia. And he looks at this from around the 1890s onwards. And he does something similar, but in a more accessible, I think for students, for lower sex students, they'll particularly like this, where he talks about ports of call and what you would expect to see, say in 1900, if you arrived in Rangoon, or if you arrived in Singapore, or if you arrived in Hong Kong. So he talks about major hotels, clubs, recreation, the community. And he uses a lot of visuals. Mine was very much a journal to recreate traveling from place to place. His is a little bit more like the travelogue. But both together do something quite similar, which is recreate that sense of the colonial Asian port city. So that was really within this chapter, those were some of the main things that I was trying to explore. The idea that for the British, in reality, they couldn't be everywhere at once. So what you have by having this series of forts, you have ports, but some of these ports are fortified. So you've got the whole series of forts and ports, which I felt, well, it is very much copying a much earlier model of empire building in some ways. But the British reinforced this with technologies, for instance.
There was a question from Natasha on the reading we had on the EIC Junior Cadet Officer. So where is that reading from?
Oh, okay. The reading, partly it's from Empire in Asia, from my chapter. I actually do talk about, so it's Robert Ramsey, he's an in Greenwich. So I was just fortunate to be there. This is some years ago. I was there on a very short research stint, and it was during a recess week. So some of you would know that means it's really tight. So there's hardly any time to get over jet lag, and I've got to get back again to Singapore. And the Maritime Museum have a great collection of journals. And this was just one that was about, I don't know, 150 pages, maybe a little bit more, but it's a journal of a cadet traveling into Asian waters for the first time. So that's why I thought it was particularly valuable, because you've got a fresh perspective in that sense. But I think I use it, and Amitav Ghosh has an essay where he uses the same journal, and he uses the journal in reference to diversity on board the ship. because the cadet talks about the different sailors and the fact that there are a lot of Lascars, there are a lot of Indian sailors on the East India Company vessel. And that continues into the era of British Empire, that you do have a lot of Indian sailors actually